The storm had rolled in just after midnight, smothering the city in sheets of rain that hammered the windows of the Whitmore estate like 1,000 fists. Inside the sprawling mansion, where every chandelier sparkled and every rug had been imported from some forgotten European palace, silence reigned, until a sudden, heavy thud broke it. Richard Whitmore, 72 years old, titan of steel and oil, a man who had outlived rivals, wives, and scandals, slumped forward over the mahogany desk in his study. The half-empty glass of Chateau Lafite slipped from his hand and shattered on the Persian carpet, staining the intricate pattern with a bloom of red that looked almost like blood. For a moment, there was only the storm outside and the hiss of the fireplace, crackling as if mocking him. Upstairs, Amelia Carter stirred. She was 32, radiant, the kind of woman who could stop conversations the moment she walked into a room. But tonight, she didn't rush to her husband's side in fear. She moved slowly, calculated, silk nightgown trailing across the marble floor. When she reached the study, her eyes locked on Richard's body, sprawled on the desk. Her gasp was sharp, rehearsed, the sound of a woman who knew exactly what was expected of her. She clutched the doorframe for effect, dialed 911 with trembling fingers, and told the dispatcher in a broken voice that her husband, the great Richard Whitmore, wasn't breathing. By the time the paramedics arrived, Richard was gone. Cardiac arrest, one of them muttered, glancing at the old man's gray face. Happens all the time at his age. No suspicion, no second look. Just another wealthy elder claimed by nature's clock. But Amelia knew better. She stood in the hallway as the gurney rolled past, her arms folded around herself as though she were fragile. Inside, her heart wasn't breaking. It was racing, fast, triumphant. 10 years of waiting, of playing the dutiful young wife, of dinners with business partners where she smiled on command, of empty nights in a cold marital bed. Finally, it had paid off. The world would see her as the grieving widow, draped in black lace, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. But in her mind, she was already imagining the empire she would soon control, the estates along the coast, the gleaming skyscrapers in Manhattan, the private jet idling in a hangar waiting for her. Everything Richard had built, everything his name commanded, would soon be hers. For Amelia Carter, the storm outside wasn't a curse. It was a beginning, a cleansing of the old, an opening for the new. She poured herself a drink from the decanter on the bar and whispered into the thunder, as if Richard could still hear her from wherever he had gone. Rest easy, darling. I'll take good care of everything. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Richard Whitmore had been watching her for years, studying every glance, every lie. He had left behind more than just his fortune. He had left a trap. And the night Amelia thought she had finally won was the night her downfall truly began. Amelia Carter hadn't always been the kind of woman who could stroll into a ballroom and draw every pair of eyes. Once, she was just another girl from the wrong side of Baton Rouge, raised in a 2-bedroom house with peeling paint and a mother who worked double shifts at a diner. She learned early that beauty could be currency, an escape ticket, if she used it wisely. Men at the diner would slip her extra bills when she refilled their coffee. Boys at school would fight for a chance to walk her home. By the time she was 20, Amelia knew she didn't want the same fate as her mother, dying tired and broke behind counter. She wanted more. She tried college for a semester, but textbooks didn't keep the lights on. Modeling gigs came and went. There were men, of course. Men with promises, men who liked her lips, her legs, the way she laughed when she pretended to be impressed. But none of them had what she was really searching for: permanence, power, and a guarantee that she would never feel small again. The night she met Richard Whitmore, it was as though fate had finally delivered. She wasn't even supposed to be at the charity gala. She'd been waitressing in a sequined black dress, filling champagne flutes for the city's elite. He spotted her from across the room, and she could feel it instantly. His gaze had weight. Richard was older than her father would have been, with a rigid posture and a face carved by decades of control. But he exuded something no one else in that glittering room did: undeniable authority. When he invited her to sit for a drink, she said yes. When he asked for her number, she gave it without hesitation. Within months, she had traded her rented apartment for a penthouse view, her waitress uniform for designer gowns. At 32, she had become Mrs. Richard Whitmore, wife of a billionaire. But marriage to Richard was nothing like the fantasy she had imagined. He wasn't cruel, just distant, cold, as though she were more an accessory than a partner. He had already lived through 3 marriages, and by the 4th, he didn't need romance. He needed image. Amelia smiled on red carpets, sat beside him at board dinners, cut ribbons at foundations she barely knew existed. Behind the photos, she was alone. The age gap weighed on her. Nights stretched long and empty while Richard locked himself in his study, poring over financial reports or simply sitting in silence. Amelia's reflection in the gilded mirrors of the estate seemed to mock her, a woman still young, still beautiful, wasting away beside a man who barely touched her. And then there was Ethan Blackwell. He had been hired as her personal trainer at the Whitmore private gym. Ethan was 30, sculpted like a Greek statue, with a smile that disarmed and a voice that made her forget she was someone's wife. At first, their sessions were innocent enough, cardio, weights small, talk. But Ethan's hands lingered too long adjusting her form. His compliments came softer, closer. One evening, while Richard was away at a board retreat, Amelia let him stay for a drink. One drink became 3, and the barrier she had built between loyalty and desire crumbled. What began as stolen moments turned into a full-blown affair. With Ethan, Amelia felt alive. She laughed again. She remembered passion. But with passion came greed, Ethan's voice in her ear, asking why she wasted her youth on a man waiting to die. He's old, Amelia. Old men don't last forever. And when he goes, everything is yours. She never admitted to Ethan that she had already thought the same thing. That every time she fastened her diamond necklace before a gala, she wondered how long she would have to wait. Richard was 72, after all. His arteries couldn't hold forever. But waiting became unbearable. Amelia was tired of sleeping in separate bedrooms, of pretending to the world that she was devoted when she felt nothing but disgust. The more time she spent with Ethan, the more the thought festered. Why wait for nature when she could give a nudge? It began innocently. Jokes about slipping something into Richard's nightly glass of wine. But Ethan was bolder than she was, hungrier. He did the research. He found a toxin, slow-acting, masked easily as a cardiac failure. No one will look twice, he assured her. 72, history of heart strain, they'll call it natural causes. Amelia resisted at first. Murder was a line she had never crossed, not even in her darkest fantasies. But every lonely dinner, every icy glance from Richard, every sweaty night with Ethan whispering about freedom, it all pushed her closer. By the 10th anniversary of her marriage, Amelia had stopped seeing Richard as her husband. He was an obstacle, and obstacles, she told herself, were meant to be removed. The plan wasn't born in a single night. It grew slowly, like mold in the dark corners of a forgotten room. At first, Amelia brushed off Ethan's suggestions. She told herself it was reckless, that she wasn't the kind of woman who plotted murder. But the idea had been planted, and the more time passed, the more it thrived. Every night, she spent staring at Richard's back as he dozed off in his armchair. Every moment, she watched him sip his expensive wine without even acknowledging her presence. The thought whispered louder. It could be tonight. It could be over. Ethan nurtured that whisper into a roar. He came armed with research, articles, case studies, obscure forums where criminals disguised themselves as amateur toxicologists. The poison he proposed wasn't flashy. It was subtle, a compound derived from digitalis, an extract that, in the right dose, slowed the heart until it simply gave out. It'll look like a heart attack, he said, tapping his temple with a smirk. The doctors will never know the difference. Amelia listened, wide-eyed, half terrified and half thrilled. The thought of freedom made her pulse quicken. The danger of being caught made her stomach churn. But when Ethan leaned close, pressing his lips against her ear, and whispered, "This is our chance. Don't you want to live?" She knew resistance was slipping. The weeks leading up to Richard's death were rehearsals. Amelia perfected the role of doting wife. She brought him his nightly glass of Bordeaux, adjusted the thermostat when he shivered, even kissed his forehead before retreating to her own bedroom. All the while, Ethan fed her courage. He's a ghost already, Amelia. You're just cutting the strings. Still, she hesitated. Killing Richard wasn't as simple as dropping a powder into wine. She needed timing, precision. If she moved too soon, suspicion might fall on her. If she waited too long, Richard's natural demise might rob her of the chance to claim victory for herself. The turning point came one evening in June. Richard sat her down at the dining table, a rare moment of directness, and told her he had scheduled another round of health checks with his private physician. It's routine, he said, swirling his glass of wine. But the heart is a tricky thing. One never knows when it will fail. His words, meant as casual reflection, struck Amelia like a bell. One never knows when it will fail. Why leave it to chance? That night, she called Ethan. It's time. The plan was simple. Amelia would introduce the toxin gradually, enough to build in his system without raising alarm. Then, on the chosen night, she would deliver the final dose. Richard would collapse, and the world would nod knowingly at the inevitability of age. Over the following days, Amelia moved like a shadow. She ordered supplements online, careful to use prepaid cards. Ethan prepared the capsules, slipping them into a vitamin bottle Amelia kept in her vanity. When Richard complained of indigestion or fatigue, she reassured him it was age, stress, nothing unusual. Each time he sipped from his glass, her heart skipped. Was this the one? Would this be the last? But Richard was stubborn. Weeks passed, and though he seemed weaker, he didn't fall. At times, Amelia thought she saw something in his eyes, an awareness, a glimmer that suggested he knew more than he let on. He would stare at her too long, as though reading her thoughts. She told herself she was imagining it. That paranoia came with guilt. Then came the storm. The night sky split with lightning, rain battering the estate's glass walls. Richard had retreated to his study, as he often did, pouring himself a vintage Bordeaux. Amelia watched from the doorway, the faint smell of oak and tobacco drifting toward her. Ethan's voice echoed in her mind. Tonight, Amelia. Do it tonight. Her fingers trembled as she tipped the final capsule into the decanter, the powder dissolving without a trace. She stood there, heart pounding, as Richard swirled the liquid and took a long sip. He didn't notice. He never noticed. Minutes passed. The storm raged. Richard coughed once, rubbed his chest, then leaned back in his chair. His face paled, the color draining as though the life itself was being siphoned away. Amelia froze, clutching the edge of the doorframe. This was it, the moment she had dreamed of, feared, prayed for. Richard's hand slipped from the glass. The stemware toppled, spilling deep red across the rug. He gasped once, twice, then slumped forward onto the desk with a heavy thud. For a heartbeat, Amelia couldn't move. The study smelled of wine and smoke, the air thick with finality. Her knees shook, her breath came shallow, but then instinct returned. She ran forward, placed a hand on his shoulder, and cried out his name in a performance worthy of an actress. No response. He was gone. She pulled her phone from the pocket of her robe and dialed 911, forcing tears into her voice. My husband, he's collapsed. Please hurry. By the time the paramedics arrived, Amelia was in full widow's costume, disheveled hair, wet cheeks, trembling hands. They carried Richard out, shaking their heads. Cardiac arrest, one muttered. At his age, it happens. No questions, no suspicions. Exactly as planned. As the ambulance doors closed, Amelia stood in the foyer, gripping the banister for support. Lightning flashed through the tall windows, illuminating her face. Beneath the mask of grief, a flicker of triumph gleamed in her eyes. Richard Whitmore was dead, and Amelia Carter believed she had just inherited the world. The funeral was a spectacle. Black limousines lined the long driveway of the Whitmore estate, their polished exteriors reflecting the somber faces of politicians, CEOs, and socialites who had come to pay respects. Reporters camped at the gates, cameras flashing each time a luxury car pulled in. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the widow, the young woman who had captivated the old billionaire's final years. Amelia Carter played her role flawlessly. Draped in a couture black dress with a veil that shadowed her face, she clutched a lace handkerchief and allowed just enough tears to glisten in the corners of her eyes. When mourners approached, she lowered her voice to a whisper, thanking them for their kindness, squeezing their hands just so. To the world, she was grief embodied. To herself, she was on the cusp of a new empire. As the priest droned on about Richard's legacy, Amelia's gaze wandered over the crowd. She saw investors who would soon be reporting to her, real estate moguls who would negotiate with her signature on the line. She saw women she'd once envied, now glancing back at her with a mix of pity and curiosity, unaware that she was imagining herself standing above them all. Amelia didn't see a coffin being lowered into the ground. She saw a door opening, one that led to freedom, power, and a life lived entirely on her terms. After the service, she retreated to the mansion, where silence finally returned. She poured herself a glass of wine from the untouched bottles in Richard's cellar, the ones worth more than her mother's house, and wandered through the vast halls as though they already belonged solely to her. The portraits of Whitmore ancestors on the walls seemed to watch her, their stern faces judging, but Amelia smiled back at them. I outlived him. I won. That night, she ran her hands along the polished marble countertops, opened drawers filled with jewels, stepped into closets overflowing with couture gowns and furs. She imagined herself hosting charity galas not as Richard's accessory, but as the undisputed queen of the empire. Soon, the yachts, the penthouses, the stocks and bonds, all of it would bear her name. The idea made her giddy, almost dizzy. And Ethan, she thought of Ethan most of all. No more secrecy, no more sneaking around. They could live openly now, travel the world together, bask in the spoils of the fortune she had waited a decade to inherit. She pictured him beside her on the deck of Richard's yacht, his tan skin glowing in the sun, his laughter free and unburdened. It was intoxicating. For the first time in years, Amelia felt truly alive. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite, watching the storm clouds fade into a clear night sky. The city below glittered like it was winking at her, welcoming her to the life she believed she deserved. She raised her glass in a private toast, whispering into the darkness, "Here's to us, Ethan, to everything we've ever wanted." When she slipped into bed alone that night, there was no grief clawing at her chest. No ache of loneliness, only anticipation. Her dreams were filled with visions of courtrooms where her name commanded respect, headlines announcing her as the heiress of the Whitmore fortune, and the envious whispers of women who would never understand how she had done it. In her heart, Amelia believed the hardest part was over. Richard was gone. The world would see her as his widow, the rightful inheritor of his empire. Nothing, she thought, could stop her now. But in the quiet corners of that sprawling mansion, where Richard had spent so many hours alone in thought, something lingered. The scent of his cologne clung stubbornly to the study, his leather chair still indented by his frame. His presence wasn't gone, not entirely. And though Amelia laughed it off as nerves, she couldn't shake the faint feeling that Richard Whitmore hadn't left the stage just yet. The morning of the will reading arrived with a sharp, winter sunlight cutting through the clouds. Amelia woke early, her nerves taut but hidden beneath layers of anticipation. She spent extra time in front of the mirror, selecting a sleek black dress that whispered restraint but screamed power. Today, she told herself, was the day everything would be official. Today she would finally step into her rightful role, not just Richard's widow, but the ruler of his empire. The law offices of Henderson and Cole were carved from mahogany and marble, a cathedral to wealth. Reporters crowded the sidewalk outside, snapping pictures as Amelia stepped from her town car, her heels clicking with deliberate rhythm. A few called out her name, but she didn't break stride. She wanted the image to be perfect, a composed widow, dignified in sorrow, but ready to shoulder the legacy of a titan. Inside the boardroom, The air smelled of polished wood and stale cigars. Rows of leather chairs faced a long table where the Whitmore family attorney, Gerald Cole, sat with stacks of folders. A few distant cousins and business associates lingered, their expressions politely curious. And then there was Martha Jenkins. Amelia almost didn't recognize her at first. The housekeeper of 30 years had always been invisible, dressed in plain uniforms, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. But today, sitting quietly in a corner chair, Martha's presence was undeniable. Her eyes were red, her posture stiff, as though she hadn't slept since Richard's death. Amelia barely spared her a thought. She's a servant, nothing more. She'll fade into the background, like always. The room hushed when Gerald adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Richard Allen Whitmore. His voice was steady, professional, but Amelia's pulse quickened. She folded her hands neatly on her lap, already rehearsing the gracious speech she would give to the cameras afterward. Gerald began with the usual formalities. Minor bequests to a handful of charities, modest stipends to distant relatives. Amelia tapped her heel softly against the carpet, waiting. Then Gerald's tone shifted, deliberate, as though he knew the gravity of what came next. And now, the disposition of the Whitmore estate, valued at approximately $1.8 billion. He paused, scanning the room. Amelia lifted her chin, ready. Gerald read, I, Richard Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, properties, holdings, assets, and liquid funds, not to my wife, Amelia Carter Whitmore, but to Martha Louise Jenkins, my loyal housekeeper and confidant of over 3 decades. For a moment, the words hung in the air, incomprehensible. Amelia blinked, certain she had misheard. A ripple of gasps moved through the room. Gerald continued reading, unflinching, but Amelia felt the floor tilt beneath her. Furthermore, Gerald added, this decision is made with full awareness and intent. I provide no financial provision for my wife, Amelia, as I've come to understand her intentions in our marriage were not of love or loyalty, but of greed. To reward such betrayal would dishonor my life's work. A stunned silence swallowed the boardroom. Amelia's mouth opened, but no words came. The blood drained from her face. She could hear faint snickers from one of Richard's nephews in the back, quickly silenced by Gerald's glare. Her eyes darted to Martha, who sat frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. The older woman covered her mouth with her hands, shaking her head as though she couldn't believe it either. For once, Amelia saw her not as a servant, but as the inheritor of everything she had schemed for. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. Gerald wasn't finished. He reached for a small black envelope, sliding it across the table. Mr. Whitmore also left supplementary material to be shared at this reading. He pressed a button, and a flat screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. Amelia's heart hammered. The screen lit with Richard's face, recorded months before his death. His voice was calm, deliberate. If you're hearing this, it means I am gone. And Amelia, it means you have failed. She gasped, her nails digging into her palm. I knew from the beginning, Richard continued, his eyes burning through the camera. You didn't love me. You loved what I represented. The money, the status, the freedom from the life you were so desperate to escape. His lips curled faintly, almost in pity. You thought I was blind. You thought age had made me weak. But I saw the way you looked at that boy, Ethan Blackwell. Did you think I wouldn't know? Murmurs erupted around the room. Amelia shook her head violently. This is a setup, she hissed, her voice cracking. The recording pressed on. So I made a choice. I lived. Longer than you expected, longer than you wanted. I waited. And while you played the part of the loving wife, I rewrote my legacy. I gave it to the one person who showed me loyalty without condition. Martha. The camera zoomed closer to Richard's face, his tone almost a growl. Amelia, if you are angry now, then you know it's true. You never wanted me. You wanted what I built, and you will get nothing. Not a penny. Not a scrap. The video ended abruptly, leaving only the hush of the rain tapping against the boardroom windows. Amelia sat paralyzed, her hands trembling in her lap. All eyes were on her, some wide with pity, others with thinly veiled satisfaction. She wanted to scream, to flip the table, to claw the smug expressions from their faces. But her throat was tight, her body rigid with shock. She could only stare at Martha, who was still sobbing quietly, clutching the folder Gerald had handed her. Amelia's empire had crumbled before it had even begun. The billion she had counted on, the life she had dreamed of, all snatched away in a single blow from the grave. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the rage and humiliation, a new fear began to gnaw at her. If Richard had known about Ethan, if he had known about her motives, what else might he have known? The widow who thought she had inherited the world suddenly realized she might inherit something far darker. Gerald Cole did not close the folder. He let the silence linger, long enough for Amelia to feel every pair of eyes burrowing into her. Then, with the precision of a man who had been rehearsing this moment, he pulled out a small black recorder and set it on the table. "Mr. Whitmore left additional materials," he said softly. "Audio and video." He instructed that they be played only in the presence of his wife. Amelia's stomach dropped. "This is absurd," she snapped, but her voice cracked on the last word. Gerald pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room, gravelly, deliberate, unmistakably alive. "This is Richard Whitmore, March 3rd, 2022. Tonight, I asked Amelia about her whereabouts last Saturday. She said she was visiting her mother, but my investigator confirmed she spent the evening at the Four Seasons Hotel with Ethan Blackwell." The recording crackled with the faint rustle of paper. Then Richard again. "She lies easily now. Too easily. I almost admire the performance. But I see through it. She doesn't love me. She waits for me to die." Amelia's fingers dug into the arms of her chair. She wanted to lunge across the table, to snatch the recorder and smash it. Instead, she sat frozen, her face burning. Gerald switched to a video file on his laptop. The screen lit up with footage from Richard's study, grainy, shaky, and incomplete. It appeared to show Amelia near the decanter, moving quickly, glancing at the door. But without audio and with no timestamp, the footage wasn't strong enough to prove intent. Gerald explained this was testamentary evidence Richard had left behind, a warning, not a police-certified exhibit. The detectives, Gerald added, would still need toxicology results to verify whether any poison had been used. "This is doctored," Amelia whispered. Louder now, desperate. "This is fake. He set me up." But the video kept playing. Richard appeared in frame, older, slower, lowering himself into the leather chair. He poured a glass of wine, swirled it, and stared at the camera as if he knew it was there. "To my dear Amelia," he said, lifting the glass. "I know what you've done. I know what you're trying to do. And I want you to understand. You will not win." He sipped, set the glass down, and leaned back. "I will outlive your patience. I will rewrite my will. And when the time comes, the world will know the truth." The video cut out, leaving only the hum of the fluorescent lights. Gerald cleared his throat. This footage was left by Mr. Whitmore as testamentary evidence. But since it hasn't been verified or authenticated by law enforcement, the police cannot act on it alone. They will need forensic proof to move forward. No one spoke. Even Martha sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, tears drying on her cheeks. Amelia's chest heaved. Her carefully crafted mask of grief was gone, stripped bare in front of strangers. She slammed her hand on the table. "You don't understand. He was cruel. He ignored me. He pushed me into this life like a prison. I deserve more." But her outburst only deepened the silence. The cousins avoided her gaze. One man scribbled notes on a pad, perhaps already thinking about how this revelation would play in tomorrow's headlines. Gerald closed the laptop with a quiet snap. "There's more," he said, his tone steady but grim. Mr. Whitmore also prepared a letter to law enforcement. In the event of suspicious circumstances, it was to be delivered to the district attorney's office. He paused, letting the weight of the words land. "I have not yet acted on that instruction. But given what we've seen today," Amelia shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the polished floor. This is a circus. Richard was paranoid. He was old, bitter, and vengeful. He wanted to punish me, to... Her voice faltered. She could feel the walls closing in. She turned on Martha, pointing a trembling finger. And you, don't you dare sit there crying like some saint. You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against me. Martha flinched but didn't respond. Her silence, her quiet grief, only made Amelia look more unhinged. Gerald raised a hand. Mrs. Whitmore, I would advise you to sit down. But Amelia didn't. She backed toward the door, her pulse slamming in her ears. The room blurred, faces twisted in judgment, Richard's voice echoing from beyond the grave, Martha's watery eyes watching her unravel. She stumbled into the hallway, her heels clattering on the marble. Reporters had been waiting outside the boardroom. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward her. Mrs. Whitmore, how do you feel about the will? Did Richard suspect you of foul play? Her lips trembled. She pushed past them without a word, ducking into the waiting car. Inside, the silence was suffocating. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass window as the car pulled away. For 10 years, she had believed she was the hunter, the one pulling strings. But Richard, old, cold, calculating Richard, had been playing his own game all along. And even in death, he was still winning. The night after the will reading, Amelia drove across town with shaking hands clutched around the steering wheel. Rain streaked the windshield, blurring the neon lights, but she barely noticed. Her mind replayed Richard's voice over and over, his cold stare through the video, his damning words. You will not win. There was only one person she could run to. Ethan. He had promised her freedom, promised her they would share everything once Richard was gone. He would understand. He would steady her. He had to. She pulled into the parking garage of Ethan's luxury condo, a place she had visited countless times in secrecy. She punched the elevator button, heart racing, clutching her coat tightly around her. When the doors opened to the 7th floor, she stepped into a hallway that suddenly felt foreign, too quiet, too sterile. His door was locked. She knocked, soft at first, then harder. Ethan, it's me. Open up. Silence. She pulled out her phone and dialed. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again, her voice rising now. Ethan, answer. It's Amelia. We need to talk. Please. Still nothing. A cold dread seeped into her bones. She pounded the door with her fist, the sound echoing down the empty corridor. Finally, a neighbor peeked out from across the hall, a woman in slippers and a robe. Are you looking for Mr. Blackwell? She asked. Yes, Amelia said quickly. Where is he? The neighbor frowned. He moved out this morning. Packed everything. Said he was going to California. Didn't even leave a forwarding address. The words hit Amelia like a slap. She stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. No, she whispered. That's impossible. She pulled her phone out again, scrolling through their messages. Weeks of passion, of whispered promises, of plans for a shared life. She called again, desperate. Voicemail. She typed frantically. Ethan, it's me. Where are you? We can fix this. We can fight them together. Please, I need you. The message hung unanswered. The 3 little dots never appeared. Her chest constricted, and she slid down the wall, her designer heels scraping against the carpet. The reality clawed at her. Ethan had used her. He had whispered poison in her ear, stoked her greed, and then disappeared the moment the money slipped away. She was a liability now, not a lover. A woman with nothing left to give. Images flashed in her mind. His smile when he first touched her hand, his voice promising soon, you'll be free, the way he looked at her in bed as though she were the only woman alive. It had all been performance. A con. The same trick she had once played on Richard, now played on her. Tears burned her eyes, hot and furious. She hated him. She hated Richard. She hated herself most of all. Dragging herself to her feet, Amelia left the building. The night air was cold, biting against her skin. For the first time in 10 years, she felt truly alone. No billionaire to shield her, no lover to soothe her. Just Amelia Carter, exposed, humiliated, and empty-handed. By the time she reached her car, Her phone buzzed with a new notification. Her heart leapt. Maybe Ethan had replied. But when she unlocked the screen, it wasn't him. It was a news alert. Sources suggest widow may be investigated in Whitmore death. The article preview showed her picture from the funeral, veil lifted, a single tear rolling down her cheek. To the world, it was the face of a grieving wife. To investigators, it was the face of a suspect. Amelia gripped the steering wheel, her nails biting into the leather. Ethan was gone. Richard was gone. The fortune was gone. And now the law was circling, from predator to prey, in less than a week. The first knock on Amelia's door came 3 days after the will reading. It wasn't the polite rap of a deliverman or the hesitant tap of a neighbor. It was heavy, deliberate, authority wrapped in sound. When she opened it, 2 detectives stood on the marble threshold, rainwater dripping from their coats. Mrs. Whitmore, the taller one, said, flashing a badge. I'm Detective Harris. This is Detective Monroe. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your husband's passing. Amelia forced a thin smile, clutching the doorframe. Of course, though I thought everything had already been settled. The doctors said it was cardiac arrest. That's what we're here to clarify, Harris replied, his tone neutral but firm. They sat in the cavernous living room, dwarfed by portraits of Whitmore ancestors glaring down from gilded frames. Amelia perched on the edge of a velvet sofa, her hands folded tightly to hide their tremor. Monroe opened a notepad. We've received new information regarding Mr. Whitmore's health. His physician insists his heart was stable for a man his age. No indication he was at risk of sudden failure. Amelia's pulse quickened. She forced a soft laugh. Doctors can be wrong, Detective. Richard was 72. Anything can happen. Harris studied her, eyes sharp. Of course. But there's more. We've also been made aware of some recordings Mr. Whitmore left behind. Recordings that suggest he feared for his safety. Specifically from you. Her stomach lurched. Recordings? She echoed, her voice catching. He was paranoid. You know how old men can be. The detectives exchanged a glance, scribbling notes. Then Monroe dropped the dagger. We've requested toxicology tests on residual samples. Early results show traces of digitalis in his bloodstream. Unusual for someone not prescribed the medication. Amelia froze. The word digitalis rang like a death knell. Ethan's research. Ethan's damn poison. She scrambled for composure. Richard took supplements. Dozens of them. Half the time, I didn't know what he was swallowing. Couldn't it have been that? Neither detective answered. The silence was more damning than words. When they finally left, promising to be in touch, Amelia collapsed onto the sofa. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in on her, Richard's ghost pressing down from every corner. She thought of Ethan again, the coward who had vanished, leaving her to drown alone. The next morning, her name was splashed across the tabloids. Black widow or betrayed wife. Police reopened Whitmore death investigation. Paparazzi camped at the gates. Every trip to the grocery store, every visit to the salon became a gauntlet of flashing bulbs and shouted questions. Strangers whispered as she passed. Friends stopped returning her calls. Inside the estate, she wandered like a trapped animal. Every glass of wine reminded her of that night. Every echo of footsteps down the hall made her think of detectives. Sleep abandoned her. In its place came nightmares of Richard rising from his study chair, pointing a trembling finger, hissing, murderous. A week later, Detective Harris returned, this time with a warrant. They scoured the study, the kitchen, the master suite. Amelia watched in mute horror as evidence bags filled. The decanter, the wine glasses, bottles from the cellar. One officer even seized her vanity vitamins. "What are you looking for?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Answers," Harris said simply. Martha Jenkins was called in for questioning too. Unlike Amelia, she didn't fidget or lash out. She sat calmly, speaking of Richard's kindness, his loyalty, his suspicion in recent years. She never accused Amelia directly, but her words painted a picture sharp enough to cut. Reporters seized on every leaked detail, headlines crowing about the saintly housekeeper and the scheming wife. Each day, Amelia felt the circle tighten. No Ethan. No allies. Just eyes, watching, waiting. She poured herself another drink one evening, staring out at the storm-darkened sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating her reflection in the glass. Hollow eyes, painted lips, a mask crumbling at the edges. For 10 years, she had thought herself the hunter. But now, with detectives closing in and Richard's shadow still haunting her, she saw the truth. She wasn't the predator anymore. She was prey. The collapse came faster than Amelia ever imagined. Within days of the warrant search, every major news outlet ran with the same narrative: the Black Widow of Whitmore Estate. Her face, once framed in glossy magazines beside Richard at galas, was now splashed across television screens with words like murder, betrayal, and fortune hunter crawling beneath. Commentators dissected her every expression at the funeral, replaying her veil-covered face in slow motion, questioning whether her tears had been real. Strangers spat insults when she tried to leave the estate. Once at a gas station, a woman shouted, "Rot in hell, you gold-digging witch," as her teenage son recorded it for TikTok. Amelia fled back to the car, shaking, mascara streaking her cheeks. The final blow came when Ethan resurfaced, not in person, but in whispers. A gossip site published grainy photos of him on a beach in Malibu, arm draped around another woman. The article speculated he had received hush money from Amelia before Richard's death. She knew it was a lie, but the sting was real. Ethan was gone, already replacing her, leaving her to drown alone. Inside the mansion, she tried to cling to some semblance of control. She poured wine into crystal glasses, wore Richard's old cashmere robe, wandered the marble halls like a queen without a kingdom. But the staff had all resigned. The silence was unbearable. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer seemed to accuse her with each passing second. Detective Harris returned once more, this time with sharper eyes and sharper words. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, standing in the study where Richard had died, "it's only a matter of time. Evidence has a way of speaking, even when people try to bury it. And right now, the evidence is screaming." That night, Amelia sat alone in the cavernous bedroom, rain streaking the windows. She looked at herself in the mirror, the flawless hair, the painted lips, the body draped in silk. But beneath it all was nothing, just a hollow woman who had gambled everything: her youth, her body, her soul, on a game she thought she could win. Now she had no husband, no lover, no fortune, and no allies. Only suspicion, humiliation, and a storm of whispers chasing her everywhere she went. She pressed her palms to the glass, staring into the black garden beyond, and finally admitted the truth. She was no longer the predator she once fancied herself. She was the prey, and the hunt was almost over. Martha Jenkins stood quietly at the edge of the cemetery, a black umbrella shielding her from the drizzle. The headstone had been carved only days earlier. Richard Allen Whitmore, 1950 to 2022. A life built on loyalty. Around her, the last mourners had gone home, leaving the ground silent. Martha knelt, placed a single white rose on the grave, and whispered, "You were right, sir. She never loved you, but I did." Her tears were the only ones that seemed to belong there. Across town, Amelia Carter sat alone in a dimly lit room, blinds drawn, the phone buzzing nonstop with reporters and investigators pressing for answers. Every headline branded her the same: murderess, Black Widow, liar. Ethan was gone. Richard was gone. The fortune was gone. All she had left were shadows and the gnawing dread that police would soon return with handcuffs instead of questions. The empire she thought would free her had turned into a trap, crafted by a man she underestimated. Richard had known, and he had planned. In the end, Amelia hadn't inherited wealth or power. She had inherited suspicion, disgrace, and a legacy of betrayal. And the cruelest truth lingered like poison in her veins. She hadn't just lost everything. She had never truly owned anything to begin with. The story of Amelia Carter became a cautionary tale whispered in high society. Money can buy you diamonds, mansions, and false love, but it cannot buy loyalty. And when greed sharpens into hunger, it devours not just fortunes, but souls.